Welcome Internet to Psychologist Casual Review, and today I wanted to talk about a very short but highly interesting article of Helen Deutsch on the pathological lie, also called pseudologia fantastica. So, what I found important in the text is that it's a text that's very humble and very well written by Helen Deutsch, in which she says that this is not the be-all and end-all of pseudologia, like her understanding is a draft, a premise to something else, that she wanted it to be like an introduction. And as such, I found it to be a very, very good introduction to the problems of pseudologia fantastica, or pathological line. It's really as you wish, the interchangeable. So, as I read it, I felt there was a lot of things that could be very, very important to discuss, and some things are still very relevant, even up to this day. And some things I think have not aged so well, but it's not necessarily because of Helen Deutsch's problems or because she did not see far enough. It's more that conceptually things have evolved, and the text was written in 1921, so basically it's been 102 years ago, so of course there's going to be new elements to this problem. So I'm going to divide this video into two parts, basically, orally, into the text itself and criticism slash deepening of the ideas behind pseudologia fantastica and what I disagree with in the text itself. So the text starts out with a very good recap of and definition of pseudologia, as it is basically a lie, but it's a lie that's both compulsive, meaning the person has to do it, there's no alternative to it, like they feel compelled to lie, and it's that lie is also something that's often very exaggerated. It's basically as if someone with their daydreaming, they were sharing the daydream as something that's real, not as something fake or not as something to be nuanced. So it's daydreaming presented as fact, very simply. And that's a very good definition of it. So for her, for Deutsch, there is in a way a merger of reality and a blending of reality and lies, and the person is going to use that. So for her, the whole process of pseudologia is something that can occur within everyone, especially at certain points in life, like teenagehood. And all the examples, clinical examples she gives in the text are of teenagehood. And they come after basically the awakening of puberty or something very close to it. So she gives about, I think, 3 to 4 examples in the text. And the main one is the one of a young girl. She doesn't name her, but it's a young girl that talked about with friends and with family about her love life. And she would write letters of her lover, who was a real man and a real boy, because he was about 16, 17, right? And basically, she wrote letters to herself with the writing and signature of the boyfriend, of the pseudo boyfriend, and her responses to it. So she invented a whole love life to herself, and the love life was not real at all. Like, that boy did exist, but she avoided him completely. She did not engage with him, his family, anything else. But her letters and what she talked about that within that relationship was very intense. It was virtually passionate. So what Dutch basically did was use therapy with her in order for her to be able to try and reach out to the inner truth. And basically what Dutch and that patient both found out was that basically there had been, unfortunately, with that in this patient, there had been incest that was done on her by her brother, meaning that her brother had abused her when she was very young. And that abuse was something that was so massive that she repressed it. For Dutch, it has to do with repression. She repressed it down, but as puberty awakened the sexual drives, basically she had to find a way to compromise between those massive drives and the abuse, because the abuse kind of hurt her. So for Dutch, it started from a real point of abuse, and it was transformed by the unconscious mind into a will to lie and a compulsion to lie, in a way to protect herself from the drives and from the incestuous wishes. Because here Dutch uses the typical Freudian theory that basically there was some excitement during the abuse, and basically that excitement is both fearful but also exciting, and because of the guilt, the exciting part is repressed, but it comes out through the lie itself. So it's not necessarily something we would do now to believe that, as abuse is often breaking rather than exciting. But it's the classical Freudian understanding of the phenomena. And I think that for her time it was completely normal to use those points of views. However, one should always try and understand how I understood the case. And of course I never met the person, and this is a reconstruction, right? It's that basically that young girl had a sexual desire, right? That's normal during teenagehood. But because of the abuse, she had to basically create an impossible relationship that was both accurate and a lie. Accurate because the boy existed, but a lie because I think she was so afraid of engaging that she had to create a whole construct, a whole setup, in order to avoid the fear and the idea that the abuse could happen again. So basically she created a whole false relationship in order to respond to her needs and to basically try and avoid the relationship. In a way, it was both a way of having a relationship without having a relationship because of the abuse. That's how I fundamentally understood that case. And she goes on to give a number of other cases, like for example, a shared pseudologia within a whole family. But basically a whole family started to believe in the lies of an individual, because the individual had an Oedipus complex that was so strong and reactivated because the father died during the war. And basically his lies was that a powerful and wealthy man was going to marry his sister, and both the mother and the sister gave into it fully, completely believed him, even though it was not accurate, it was a lie, and they knew it was a lie, but they completely engaged into the lie, perhaps as a way of dealing with the death of the father. But for Dutch, it's more that there was the Oedipal wishes of the death of the father and having the mother. And in her case, in his case, and in this case Dutch presents, it's more that the son basically displays his Oedipal wishes onto the sister through the invention of the rich and wealthy man that would both replace the father and be an extension of the son. So basically in this whole case, the whole family was completely engulfed in pseudologia. In a way, it was a pseudologia à deux, like in Folie à deux, right? And basically that was a very interesting case. But for her, pseudologia doesn't seem to be necessarily pathological per se, but it's a moment of fragileness in the development of an individual. And remember, the whole cases she gives are basically teenagers that awaken to sexuality, and pseudologia awakes at the same time. And for her, this is because at the core something happened, something of a traumatic and true event happened, but it was so ununderstandable, beyond understanding for the individual, that they had to transform it into a lie. And that lie is the compromise between those traumas, the wishes and the excitement, and the reality that's beyond understanding. So it's very interesting as a point of view, I feel, what she wrote. And something that I feel at the core, there's a lot of good and interesting things to talk about, But I also disagree on a number of her assessments. The first one I fundamentally disagree on is the fact that there's a form of normalcy in it. I don't think, given what I've seen, that when one could call it normal. It's already a breaking off from accepting reality, and in a way, even though she gives examples of teenagers, she doesn't give any examples of adults with pseudologia fantastica. And within adults, I have found that it's much more compulsive, much less manageable in terms of it's not necessarily compartmentalized in a sector, but it can affect the whole life of the individual. And I do fundamentally believe that it's not necessarily a point of repression, rather than a whole process of transformation. I would rather say it's repression. So repression is much more severe than, how can I say it? Sorry, I made a slight mistake. So she believes in repression. I believe it's suppression, meaning that it's the step below. It's really like there is a conscious element that's aware, but the conscious and the unconscious mind both come together to push it down. Whereas for repression, it's more like in the unconscious, and the conscious mind at some point played a role, but like it's really in the unconscious. Suppression in itself is much more severe and much less manageable for an individual. Like it has to really be pushed really down for it to be maintained. And as such, I feel that the compromise is less within the psyche itself, like for neurotics, and she says it's a neurotic symptom. I don't believe it's fundamentally neurotic. As for the neurotics, the symptom is basically a compromise between the inner psyche, between the psyche itself, meaning the id and the ego and the superego are all making a compromise with the symptom. I'm simplifying it to the extreme, but I want you to understand the process. For me, we're not in that dilemma with pseudologia. Pseudologia doesn't seem to be, let's say, just a psychic compromise, but it also seems to be an interpersonal compromise, as basically the lie has to be told to someone, and that's something I think she didn't insist enough on. That she says that basically, with or without a public, it doesn't change much. I don't agree with that. The fact of lying is an interpersonal action. It's not just in terms of the psyche. As the psyche itself is inner, and this is fully with the relationship to the object, and that her idea that pseudologia does not seek the look of another person or the admiration of another person, is just like a nice bonus. I really don't think it's true. It's not a nice bonus. That's the whole part of the process. And of course, the lie is still going to continue with or without the approval of others. That I completely agree with her on. But I don't think that the role of the other can be dismissed as easily. I think that it's fully there. And it's there because I think that there's a necessity for the individual to be seen, and also to try and make another person believe in the reality, as trying strengthening the symptom itself. And basically, I would just say that I think the role of the other is fundamental in pseudologia, that it's not just an inner process, and the other is just there as a spectator. I think the others are there also as part of the whole process, as actors, and not just spectators of the lie itself. And to back my argument, I'm not going to quote my patients, as this is completely confidential, but how I see it, and that's my vision of the phenomena, is that basically the pseudologia tries to call upon other people to act in a certain way. It's a form of projective identification through lying, and I think that that's fundamentally important. That even if it fails not because the other one is unimportant. It fails because the person does not know how to use their projective identification in another way. they're trying to transform reality. It's like the person is blocked, and the same pattern repeats and repeats and repeats until it succeeds. That's how I see it. It's not because the others are dismissed, it's because the pattern is so strong that the others have to respond in a certain way in order for it to move on or to change a bit. So that's my point of view. Of course, it's really my point of view. I don't necessarily have that much experience, and I don't want you to think it's truth, but I just wanted to share how I felt about the book, or about the article in this case. And also, last thing is that I fully agree with the fact that there was something true at the very core of it. Like, at the core of all those pathological lies, there is an element of truth, but it has been lost. And I think another important thing is to understand is that in case of adults who have it, it doesn't just work to go to the core. The person realizes the truth that has been lost and the behavior ceases to be. It's going to be much more complicated, and as of yet, my understanding is that it takes a lot of security for the individual within the therapeutic relationship to start giving up the pseudologia. It's very, very complicated, and there is a lot of subtlety involved. But I don't think that it's just about going to the root cause and finding it out, thus it changes. It might work with teenagers. I have no experience on that, on pseudologia within teenagers, so I don't know. But with adults, it's a much longer process, and I think that transference and countertransference are absolutely necessary. I also feel that what I found interesting is that she doesn't talk about necessarily how she perceives things in her countertransference, and that I think is very lacking, because I think that that's the best guide in the treatment of pseudologia. And I also disagree with her on the fact that basically I'm gonna go back to basically the role of the others, because I forgot something very important. I think I forgot to say that those people with pseudologia find it very, very hard, and they might even suffer a lot if they're called out to be liars by other people, as their self-image is going to be damaged and hurt. So others are not to be dismissed. They are fundamentally a part in the symptom of pseudologia, fantastica. So I hope you found this review interesting, and I'll see you in the next one.